Welcome back to Late Edition, Beat Chronicles. My name is Terry Lipshetz, and I'm one of the behind-the-scenes producers of the program. We're currently working on the next set of episodes that will look at the 1990 death of 20-year-old Susan Nesersmith in Wildwood, New Jersey. Until then, please go back and listen to past seasons if you have not already. Lee Enterprises produces other podcasts, including Across the Sky, a program dedicated to all things weather and climate. A recent episode is of particular interest to listeners of Late Edition Beat Chronicles, as it takes you behind the scenes into forensic meteorology. We have broken out a segment of that episode that focuses on the research conducted that can be used as evidence in depositions and even inside the courtroom. Forensic meteorologist Sherilyn Patrick, Director of Forensic Services for WeatherWorks in Hackettstown, New Jersey, provides insight. For the full episode, search for Need Weather Information for a Lawsuit? Call a forensic meteorologist under the Across the Sky podcast on all major podcasting platforms. A link to the program is also in the show notes of this episode.
Learning to swim is a magical time in a child's life. The excitement of the water, playing with friends, making memories on vacations that will last a lifetime. British Swim School has locations throughout the U.S. where we specialize in teaching anyone to swim, from babies to adults, beginners to those who need a refresher pre-summer. British Swim School's instructors make learning to swim fun with gentle teaching methods. Sign up your kids for swim lessons at BritishSwimSchool.com.
Welcome back, everybody, to the Across the Sky podcast, brought to you by Lee Enterprises. Meteorologist Joe Martucci here. We have Kirsten Lang. We have Matt Colliner. We have meteorologist Sherilyn Patrick. She's Director of Forensic Services at WeatherWorks in Hackettstown, New Jersey here. And make sure, too, you can subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, and new episodes come out every Monday, usually at night, usually every Monday night. You can definitely find it on Mondays wherever you get your podcast. All right, so Sherilyn, back to forensic meteorology. So someone calls you, they said they need, weather information for a court case. I know it's going to vary, but like in general, how long does it actually take to do this? And, what's the process? Like, what is it like to actually sit there and actually go through this data?
Yeah, of course. So usually if somebody calls us or makes a request for a forensic report, we can do anything from just doing an objective weather analysis where we just say, hey, here are the weather conditions in the days leading up to and including the date, time of incident at this particular location, to as far as reviewing any kind of discovery. So discovery usually includes like documentation relating to the incident in question, maybe a complaint. There's a document called interrogatories, which is just questions about what happened that the plaintiff or the claimant has to answer. Depositions. So oftentimes the attorneys will depose both sides, the plaintiffs and the defendants, to figure out, how much do they know or remember of the actual incident, to try and get those facts on paper as if it's, essentially under oath. So we can review those. We review any photographs. It's especially nice if they have photographs right after the incident occurred. And sometimes we even get surveillance video that we can review. So in those cases, if we just do like an objective analysis, we're not reviewing any kind of case discovery, we're just looking at the weather conditions and reconstructing. Those take about 2 to 4 hours worth of research. And then, of course, if we're reviewing discovery and maybe coming up with extra conclusions, those are on the order of 4 to 7 hours worth of research or higher, depending. But at least in terms of the stages of what we do is that we plot the incident location on Google Earth. We kind of get a feel of all the weather stations. We like to do a cross section. So north, south, east, and west of all the weather stations around that kind of incident location. And then we collect that data. So maybe it's airport, maybe it's daily precipitation observations, those co-ops and COCOs, any kind of National Weather Service products that were issued during that time, and then also radar. And we'll take all that data, we'll review it, we'll summarize it, and essentially use our expertise as meteorologists, knowing essentially how storms work and the natural climate of the given area, and create that kind of site-specific weather report that's specific to that date, time, and location, and tailored to the incident in question.
Now, do you and your team ever actually go into court, or do you just supply these written reports, or is there ever any oral component to this where you're actually brought into the courtroom to testify, or is it just a report that you're giving to the lawyers or to the judges or whoever is looking for that information?
Right. So we actually work as expert witnesses, they're called. So not only do we do the reports, but we can be called to testify. So sometimes it can be in the form of where the court case is happening and then we're put on the stand in front of judge and jury and we're getting cross-examined by the attorneys. Other times there's another form called depositions, which I mentioned before. So we, as expert witnesses, can be called and deposed to talk about the report that we created. So those can be interesting. I haven't actually testified in court before, but I have been deposed twice before. And one of the cases I actually got deposed on, that was a tough one. I was deposed for about 3 hours. I was representing one of the defendants, and there actually can be multiple defendants. So I had 2 other defense attorneys that were essentially on my side. And then I was being cross-examined by the plaintiff's attorney. And it wound up being a little bit of a difficult case. This was an incident where somebody slipped and fell outside of a Domino's. They were going to pick up pizza after work, and then they slipped and fell. And the contention was this old snow and ice that this person slipped and fell on, and therefore the defendants were liable, aka they should have removed and remediated the snow and ice there. And actually cause, a liability concern, or was it an ongoing storm? And if that's the case, there usually is favor on the defendant's side, because there's only so much that you can do if snow is actively falling, particularly if it's heavy. So this particular slip and fall happened at the tail end of a snowstorm where it was just tapering out. And they can be very strict on, is it precipitating or not, to determine, is it storm in progress? Because if it's storm in progress, great, that's favorable for the defendants. But if you can prove that there wasn't a storm in progress, then that's a little bit more favorable for the plaintiffs. So I was being grilled by the plaintiff attorney to try and show, was it actually snowing at that time? Because my report said, yes, it was. And I had to go through all the different data sources I utilized. I had to go through radar to essentially build that case for my client, which was the defendants.
Okay, Sherilyn, so I'm not sure if I heard this correctly, but a couple of things. First, did you say that you actually will recreate, do you actually recreate the situation physically at times, or did you just mean that you recreate it in the fact that you compile enough past data to try to figure out what actually happened?
Yeah, the latter. Sometimes we have worked with other experts who can actually kind of physically recreate what conditions would have been. Those are particularly useful in lighting cases where somebody can actually mimic, what it looked like at that particular time and location, in terms of what the plaintiff would have seen. But most of the times, we're using tables and charts and maybe radar images to try and come up with, here's what other conditions were.
And then the other question I have too with this is, are a lot of these cases that you get, are they somewhat local to where you're located, or are they just pretty much anywhere across the country?
At least what our company does is that we can do nationwide. So as long as it's in the US or a US territory where we can use NOAA data, it's free game, and anybody can retain us and hire us. But it tends to be easier on the sense of our clients if we are local, especially if we do need to testify. So I would say majority of our cases are in New Jersey, New York, and PA. But like I said, nationwide. We actually had one of our experts a couple months ago. We flew him out to the middle of nowhere, Washington State, to testify on a court case. So we've done it all. We can go anywhere.
As just a funny question, has anyone ever called you outside of the U.S. looking for a forensic report?
They have. We do occasionally get people inquiring from Canada, and we prefer to kind of stay away from it just because a lot of the certifications, you don't necessarily need an American Meteorological Society certified consulting meteorologist certification to testify, but Canada does have their own version of that, and we would be more comfortable having that certification there. Sure. I've gotten requests for, the Virgin Islands, not necessarily the U.S. I think we got a request for like an army base in Korea. We've gotten requests for in Europe. So technically we could do them, but we prefer to stay away from them unless we have that particular jurisdiction certification. Certainly has more weight when it comes to testifying.
And we talked about locations of where you covered, but I'm also curious about when. What's the farthest back y'all have looked back at an event? Whether you or someone on your team, how far back can you go, and what's the farthest back you have gone?
We can go as far back as the weather data is available. Right now, it tends to be quote unquote easier for us to go back to, let's say, the early to mid 2000s because of the way the METAR data is structured. That kind of airport data is easily readable, but technically we can go as far back as we need to.
Curious about the weather? The Lee Weather Team hosts Across the Sky, a fast-paced weekly podcast that tackles hot topics and cold, plus what's trending in meteorology, science, and climate. Join Matt Holliner, Kirsten Lang, Joe Martucci, and Sean Sublett each week on Across the Sky through Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Learning to swim is a magical time in a child's life. The excitement of the water, playing with friends, making memories on vacations that will last a lifetime. British Swim School has locations throughout the U.S. where we specialize in teaching anyone to swim, from babies to adults, beginners to those who need a refresher pre-summer. British Swim School's instructors make learning to swim fun with gentle teaching methods. Sign up your kids for swim lessons at BritishSwimSchool.com.